Thank you so much for joining me today. I welcome Saimma Dyer and Fatimah Ashrif, creators of Ray of God, a non-for-profit organisation promoting feminine spiritual wisdom. Now, the two launched RayFest, which is a global online festival hosted in October 2020. It welcomed an array of women from religious leaders, spiritual teachers, activists, academics, and creatives. You can catch the videos from RayFest on rayofgod.com. Saimma, Fatimah, welcome. Thank you so much for joining me this afternoon.
Thank you so much for having us.
I'm so excited. I mean, just coming into that festival, the energy was incredible, absolutely incredible. And I would love to gain an understanding and share with our viewers how Ray manifested and what your intention is for it and with it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think you've been part of the journey from the start as well. But just to give an overview, I think we were really lucky that Fatima and I, at the same time, felt the sacred feminine start calling to us in different ways. And we weren't really sure what it meant, but we knew that, you know, we were feeling it together, and there were other friends in our community that were also kind of coming to these questions of what is the feminine aspect of God, if there is one. And the fact that we were having these questions, we thought, well, you know, there's a few of us having this, perhaps we can create a space just to explore what this might mean to us. And so we decided to hold a small retreat with a few friends, and we were blessed to have some amazing teachers that were happy to help support us and share their wisdom and just hear from us as well. And we had no expectations. So that was October 2016. We held a small retreat in Kendal. And it was absolutely beautiful. And it just felt that this idea of the sacred feminine wasn't so much that we were kind of heading toward her, but more that she was calling us as a collective. And this question opened up, you know, what is the sacred feminine, and how is she part of the divine universe, and what can she show us about ourselves and a deeper understanding of our faith? And so the more we kind of sat with this, the more opened up for us. And we had subsequent 2 more retreats with more teachers that came from different traditions, not just teachers, but just, you know, people that have been walking different spiritual paths with different understandings of the sacred feminine. And somewhere along the way, these small gatherings gathered momentum. And then we realized that we needed to create an intentional space to really explore these questions. And that's where Ray of God came about. And so we created this nonprofit, and we, you know, had a very clear vision, and we felt very guided into the different ways that we could look at this, not just within our own tradition of Islam, but also looking at an interspiritual perspective. Because one thing that we realized is the feminine's always been there, no matter what religion, what spiritual tradition, tribal tradition, or traditions that even don't have names. That energy has always been there. And so Ray of God was born, and the name for the non-profit actually came from our teacher Mevlana Rumi. There's a line in the Divani Shamsi Tabriz where it's very short, but it's always stayed with me. Like I've always felt this, what was Mevlana trying to say? But perhaps the time wasn't quite right then, but he said a lot. And it follows hadith of the Prophet Muhammad. But Mevlana takes it a little bit further, and he says, woman is a ray of God. She is not created, she is creative. And I always in my mind like to give that capital C on creative, because there's a connection there to the divine creator. And it was really reflecting on those lines that just felt, you know, Mevlana has been part of our path for so long, and we wouldn't be discussing the divine feminine if it wasn't for him. And so we just wanted to take that initial guidance and see how it opened up for us. And that's how Ray of God came about. And so following those 3 initial retreats, those very small retreats that we had in Kendal, we had made the intention to do a festival where we could create a space for faith leaders from different traditions from around the world that could come, and we would have access to them. And initially it was meant to be in person, but of course 2020 brought its own challenges and openings. And initially we thought we would put it on pause, but actually, as you know, Tazeen, you've seen, the online space has become such an amazing space to try new ideas. And we decided to turn it into an online festival. So RayFest came out of that, RayFest 20 for 2020. And we had, as you said, an amazing array of women who perhaps if we had done it in person would not have been able to attend because of travel and, you know, diaries and restrictions. But the online world means that, you know, friends can tune in. And we had an amazing group of women. We had an amazing group of attendees. And what was really special was that initially Fatimah and I thought, you know, we'll create an array of events, different times with lots of space in between. And if friends can kind of pop in for a few, that would be wonderful. But actually what turned out is that so many people tuned in from the start all the way through to the end. And that was from around the world, you know, friends from different time zones, waking up early, going to sleep late. And yeah, that was just absolutely wonderful. So we're still in the flow of that. That was over Halloween weekend, but we're still kind of feeling very much in that space. So
that's so beautiful, Simon. So much, you know, as you're sharing, there are so many different feelings arising. I'm going to share a very personal thing. I actually had quite a lot of resistance when you first told me about the first retreat. And reflecting back now, it really feels this, it's almost like she's been hidden to many of us for such a long time that even the words divine feminine can invoke quite a strong reaction. But for me, it wasn't until being immersed with you both in Kendal that it was like reconnecting to this lost part within. And I mean, I tuned into RayFest, and what really came to light for me was this space of women weaving together and the pure magic that comes from that. And, you know, often in a world which is very, I mean, I just share my own brief history, which is, and I think parts of it you can both identify with too, like going into very masculine dominated workplaces. I mean, I've joined a trading floor in an investment bank, not much of the feminine there back in the back in the late 90s. And so kind of coming to rest with the connection of this other side to woman, to feminine, is quite something. And the other thing that the Rumi, I mean, that one line, as you say, I mean, you could just sit with that for days and see what comes from it. But Fatimah, I would love to hear just a short sort of reflection from you too. Is there anything that you'd like to add?
Yeah, sure, Tazina. I will share something. I mean, I think that, you know, I think we've both witnessed a steady deepening from that first retreat. And you know, the power of, I guess, the power of intention and prayer in helping you to discover what it is that you'd like to discover. You know, we had started this journey knowing very little of how the divine feminine could unfold in our lives, and just putting out that question, that intention in a prayerful way has taken us on this incredible journey that, you know, more recently manifested in the festival. And I think as we look back, we can just see how things have just steadily deepened for us in our own personal journeys, but also just in how we interact and engage with the world too. And with the festival, I think, you know, it's just, we really wanted to hold it in a very different way. You know, we had talked about, you know, is this a conference? Is this a retreat? And then we're like, no, it's a festival. You know, we don't want to fall into the pattern of these very sort of, you know, you were saying, you know, we're so used to, we know what the masculine spaces look like, and there can be a benefit in how those are held also. But we were really clear that we wanted to create something different, a really safe, sacred space where there could be conversation and deepening. And we were just really clear that it needed to look and feel different, and that it needed to really allow for a conversation from the heart. And I think that, you know, when friends were tuning in, this is what they were tuning into. They were tuning into this real heart space that was being created by each of us. And we shared this vision with each of our contributors that we're trying to really create a sacred space, a container, a heartful space. And we really wish you to speak from your heart. And so many of the speakers also were not used to speaking and engaging in that way in this kind of setting. So on retreat they were, but not in this kind of public setting. For some of them, it was a challenge to adopt that, but one that they were really willing to engage in. And so I think what we really witnessed and experienced was this overflowing of heartful sharing that everybody seemed to really feel. You know, in the feedback we've received, you know, people really felt and experienced this, and it was very powerful for us and for others. And as Saimma says, you know, we're still riding on the wave of that beauty generated.
Well, I'm just going to share with our viewers a glimpse of some of that beauty now. We had Reverend Dr. Karen Georgia Thompson sharing. So bear with me. I would love to share what she brings.
For me, the divine feminine is extremely important. As a Christian minister, I'm ordained in the Christian church. It is not historically a prevalent reference that we see. And yet in scripture, there are multiple places and references to the divine feminine, particularly since in Christianity, we do use the Hebrew scriptures as well as the Gospels. The Hebrew scriptures speak quite extensively to the presence of the feminine divine. So for me, one of the places where that contextualizes is an understanding in Christian theology of all being made in divine image. And if we go with that as a central piece of understanding about who we are as created in God and in God's image, then it says to me that the divine feminine is present, and that is reflected also in my presence and in who I am and in what I bring. So the idea and notions of God as masculine or God as only masculine deteriorate I think, the personhood of women, and has done so for an extended period of time, and supports a more patriarchal worldview. So, so being able to recover that understanding of divine feminine is important for me as a Christian. I'm also a person of African descent, and as a person of African descent, I am recovering the traditions of my foremothers and forefathers brought into my context, which is the Caribbean, as a part of the transatlantic slave trade. And those are still present for us, and they inform my own understanding of God and the femininity of the divine. So the divine feminine for me is very much rooted in my African cosmology, and in particular around Ifa and Yoruba tradition, that speaks to the manifestations of the divine and calls on Oya, Yamaya, Oshun, and others, and name the divine feminine in ways that are tangible and allow for access. I think that to kind of get to the other part of your question about healing, I think it's important because so much, especially for women, there is so much that pushes back against who we are, just in terms of presence, right? And regardless of where we think we are in our process, right, we still need to move into spaces of decolonizing and diminishing the patriarchal ways in which we've understood the world, understood women, understood female presence, understood leadership, understood power, all of that. And so I think a recovery of the divine feminine and an understanding and walking in the divine feminine, I think, is a way of healing the planet, right?
Yes.
I mean, I can't begin to, she's so succinctly in those 3 minutes articulated generations upon generations of what really is at stake here. Colonialism, patriarchy. I mean, just working with Humanity's Heart and refugees, 90% of the aid workers and the people bringing relief to refugees, the largest crisis for mankind, obviously before last year, the largest humanitarian global crisis, 90% were women. It's the unseen work of women. It's the mothers that are recreating home in temporary shelters. It's not talked about, it's not discussed, it's all unseen. We can all talk about generations of trauma, intergenerations of trauma. I mean, I think as a species, the human species is traumatized, quite frankly. You've gone through the impact of colonialism and how it's touched so many different people, what it brought. And of course, this central tenet of patriarchy, when somehow organized religion started to be controlled by men to an agenda that somehow lost this feminine. And we're going to come back to the original point that she raised on how in Hebrew traditions, she's always been there. I've got some exciting speakers to share with everyone on that. But enough about my sharing. Tell me, what does her sharing bring to each of you?
Yeah, I could really, of course, resonate with much of what Karen Georgia shared actually as well. And I feel that, you know, the journey with the divine feminine has really been for me about connecting, as she spoke of, the, you know, with the feminine aspect of the divine and to be discovering that, but also, you know, the divine in woman. And you know, I'm going to just share a very brief sort of story of my first meeting with my teachers, and I apologize to Saimma if I'm pinching some of what she might have shared too, but I'll help us along with the conversation. I mean, she can talk about other things, but I think it was a really pivotal sort of, or an opening moment where this seed of the divine feminine was really, I think, sown when I look back. And it was, you know, some years ago, perhaps 2007, 2008, my first meeting with teachers, Kabir and Camille. And there were two really important things that just really worked their way very deeply into my heart and just have stayed there. And one was, you know, hearing for the first time the word of God as I had known it to be recited by a woman. And Camille had recited the opening verses of the Quran, and she had recited them so beautifully and gracefully. And it was the first time in a semi-public setting I'd heard a woman recite the Quran in her own way, you know, with her own melody. And it was incredibly beautiful and just penetrative, and there was, for me, there was just this response of, some form of recognition that this was just a really important thing. And the other thing that happened was we were asked to introduce ourselves in a circle. And, you know, we all went round and said our names, said where we were from. And then finally, Camille and Kabir were left. And Camille said, you know, I'm Camille, I'm from California. And then Kabir said, you know, I'm Kabir, I'm from her. And it was this public acknowledgement and honoring of the feminine, of the female, of woman. And I knew that I had arrived in a place which was right for me, because there was a part of me that was not being received in other religious settings that I had found myself in. And I thought, I really feel that these two things really touch on both the divine aspect of the feminine, but also the divine, the feminine aspect of the divine, and then the divine within woman, and an acknowledgement of that. And that really is, I feel, as I look back, you know, where this whole thing kind of started, and what really unfolded for me, you know, just picking up on Karen George's point about healing, and also Tazeen, you were talking about trauma as well. And of course, there is the ancestral trauma. There is, you know, there is the impact of these things like colonialism, sort of, you know, working their way through us, and then there is, you know, what we pick up in our own personal journeys as we go through. And I think one of the things that I had really internalized as a young person was that, you know, that the masculine was was the thing to be aspired towards. And so I had always very much favored very masculine qualities in myself. And as I came upon this journey, I started to begin to realize where I had been suppressing the feminine within myself, and actually to begin to be in relationship with the feminine aspects of myself, and to give voice and space to them, and to begin to explore what that means and what that looks like for me personally. So yeah, there's so much more Karen shared, but just to say a little bit of the bits that sort of touched me and resonated.
Beautiful. I mean, I remember hearing Zaliha's Adhan for the first time, and I think I sobbed for hours. It was the first time I'd heard a woman read the call to prayer out loud. And Saimma, I'm so, you know, I really want to share, I mean, again, thank you for so many of us, for you banging on about the divine feminine, which initially, I think I mentioned earlier, there was a resistance. But I'm so grateful to your dedication to her. I want to talk quickly about the inclusive azanas. We're mentioning azans at this moment. In Ramadan 2019, I think it was Fitna, the Organization for the Feminist Islamic Troublemakers of North America. Love that title, lady.
Love it.
We had, I mean, why don't you tell our viewers more about what that was, and how beautiful just hearing the call to prayer in a woman's voice, which it's 2021, and this is a conversation that we're having, that it's not a done practice. So the importance of this is huge, quite frankly.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, the voice, right? Her voice is one of the central themes of RayFest, and I know we're going to come back to it later on. But so yeah, I love fitna. I just think what a wonderful, they talk about constructive troublemaking, right? And so I came across them on Facebook. I joined their group, and I got to know some of the moderators. And I believe it was one of the moderators, Zara, who kind of said, would it be great to do a project about, female reciters? And I said, I'd love to be involved in that, just because obviously my own interest, and the fact that as a community, we've been working with women and their voice, and getting them to lead and do the azan, and getting comfortable and reclaiming our voice. And so it was a great opportunity for me to be working with a different community, who do things differently, and really learn from that. But the core aim of the Inclusive Azan project was, if you can speak, you can do the azan. Actually, let's scrap that. If you exist, you can do the azan. You don't need to be able to speak, because we also had a sign language azan that was done as well. And it's this idea that why as women we have this idea that if we're going to do the azan, it has to be the most beautiful rendition. I don't think men worry about their voice or how they sound when they do the azan, right? And yet this is something very much seems to be an issue with women. And so for us, it was about, we would like anybody who wants to join to have the opportunity to recite the azan however you wish, in whichever language you wish, in whichever style you wish. And it was so beautiful. We had 30 azans that were submitted for each day of Ramadan, and the variety that we got. And we had some really young fitnas, some very young fitnas that were just learning the azan, who did it, and it's just phenomenal, the beauty of the voice. This whole thing in Islam, this misunderstood concept of the voice is aura, right? So we're really challenging that, to say, well, if a man's voice can also be incredibly beautiful and melodious. No one worries about him turning anybody on. So why is this a problem with women?
Can I just say something though, Saimma? I was astonished. A few years ago, we had some friends over, and it was the woman who found it very challenging for another woman to say the azan and to lead the prayer. And so it's so deeply ingrained. And I really want us to come back to this, because I think it's so important to look at this subtle effect of patriarchy, and how it permeates all the different beliefs that then get constructed against ultimate reality. Again, thank you, Saimma, for bringing fitna to all of us and helping us find these voices.
You're very welcome. I love that, bringing fitna. That wasn't me.
It's on record, sorry.
But important work to help us find the voice. And one voice I really want to share with everyone now is Rabbi Dr. Jill Hammer and some of her showings, because Fatih, what you touched on, and Saimma as well, what we've discovered is how the mystical traditions seem to uphold and revere the sacred feminine far more than, let's say, we're finding in mainstream religion. So just want to share her clip with you all.
I think I first met the divine feminine, the sacred feminine, as a child in all kinds of interesting places, probably in the stories of biblical women and the picture Bible on my night table. I grew up in a basically secular Jewish home, but they had some attachment to Jewish stories that came down to me and caught my interest. But I also read lots of world myths about goddesses and heroines and prophetesses that really affected me. Some fantasy novels, actually, that probably awoke this in me. And later on, when I was really on the sense of her, of the divine feminine, I really found her in two different places, both in the mystical tradition, my own mystical tradition, the tradition of the Kabbalah, which has lots to say about the sacred feminine as that mystical tradition understands her, and also in the work of feminist poets, and particularly Jewish feminist poets who were trying to reclaim an image of God that included them, and that included what they cared about. And so, sort of with these two friends, I really began to put together my own desire to see that image and that voice in my more public in my tradition. Most they don't tell you about goddess in Hebrew school. They don't tell you about they don't tell you that there's a tradition of the divine feminine in Jewish tradition. In a basic Jewish education, you only find out if you go looking for it, sort of in the corners of scholarship. And I really have, in some ways, devoted my life to making it more not only public, but a lived experience to be in communion. And with Shekhinah, which is the word I use most for the sacred feminine. In Hebrew, Shekhinah comes from the word which means to dwell. It means the indwelling, the one who dwells within. And it's a word that gets used from the Talmudic era onward to describe the experience of God living within the physical world. That it's an aspect of the divine that is entwined with, is sort of coexistent with the universe. And I think, as someone who loved nature and my experience of nature, that was an idea that felt so resonant to me, mattered to me, that I could look at a tree or a stone and I could find God there.
Yeah, amazing.
It's so amazing because just hearing both of your journeys, there's so much that she's shared that's also really connecting with what you've both described. I love it when she says that they don't really tell you about the goddesses in the Jewish tradition. And I had a conversation with a Druid earlier today, and I also was reflecting on Hinduism and the different goddesses there. But I mean, it is a bit like, the sun and the moon, right? We need both. If the sun were literally a degree in a different place, existence wouldn't be what we know it to be today. And even with the moon, which, if you take the moon as the analogy of the heart that's always reflecting back the sun, we need the moon too for our existence. And there's so much in the fact that she has been hidden and tucked away. And I can't help but be curious if that's intentional in some ways as well. That, finding her and discovering her is part of this human journey, right? And I love, what the word Shekinah itself, one who dwells within. So just sharing a bit more, Saimma, I want to know a little bit more about how that dwelling within and connecting to that, what that's brought for your heart.
You know, I something occurred to me during this conversation, which was quite powerful for me. I always used to say that it was quite sudden, this being forcefully woken to the sacred feminine. And it happened suddenly, right? As if I could put a time on it, as if it was 2016 or 2015 or 20, you know, whatever. But as we were talking in this conversation about the voice, and as Fatimah was talking about, you know, hearing Camille, again, exactly the same experience for me, right? Just, I think I spent the first 6 years crying uncontrollably, and then the next 6 years crying uncontrollably, but knowing why I was crying uncontrollably. Awareness is a great thing, right? And I love the analogy that you've made of the moon, because she's always there, whether we can see her or not. And whether we can see her or not, she is every single day having an effect on us, on our body, on our mind, on our spirit. And it's this awakening, it's this understanding that even if I don't understand it right now, and I may never understand it, it's still affecting me. And it's this idea of just surrendering to that and seeing what comes up. And what came to me during, you know, a few moments ago while we were talking was about this, you know, when Fatima was talking about hearing Camille, and I thought, yes, that was the first time in my life I heard a woman recite from the Quran. And I, you know, was thinking about my childhood, and, you know, I attended a lot of khatams, you know, there's a different word for that, I'm sure, but growing up, that's how I, you know, saw it, women's gatherings where we would pray for somebody who had deceased or for a momentous occasion, and you would do zikr on, you know, dried date stones. And I was reflecting back and I thought, I don't remember anybody reciting the Quran. If we did it quietly, and then we would do a dua that was audible. But I thought, yeah, Camille was the first person I ever heard, the first woman I ever heard recite the Fatiha. And all of a sudden I had a memory of being very young and living with my grandmother. And I realized, no, my grandmother was the first woman who ever recited the Fatiha, because she taught me how to pray. And at some point along the journey with her, I became the one that recited, because I started leading us in prayer. And that was a memory I had completely, like, it was just hidden. And it just came up in that moment. And I just thought, oh my goodness, you know, we have these examples, but for whatever reason, they've been hidden from us. And I thought, I never realized that my grandmother was my first Imam. And then when my understanding of Arabic surpassed hers, because she hadn't learned enough, she felt, then she told me that I had to start leading the prayer. And I'm looking back now on those, you know, they're such cherished memories, and yet they haven't come to my heart until this moment.
Yeah, thank you, Saimma, for sharing that, and may your grandmother be blessed. She sounds incredibly beautiful. And as you were sharing, it just really kind of also came these subtleties with this. You know, interestingly, in Judaism, faith follows the mother. It's the matriarchal system. Whereas in Christianity, Islam, faith goes towards the father. And I'm just, again, reflecting as a mother, and I want to talk about the mother a little bit later, but just the holding of a home that falls in a lot of families to the mother. And again, it's the unseen, and yet it becomes the fabric. I was speaking to a few therapist friends from the Threshold community, and most psychotherapists, the patients they meet, a large percentage, the beliefs that they're working through, that they're holding, come from that relationship with mother. And it's just, again, it is like the moon. I mean, the moon meditation that you had through Ray held recently, just at the end of 2020 with Marie Elsa Bragg. It was so incredibly beautiful to connect with the yin energy, with the surrendering, trusting, more patient aspects that the feminine offers. So Fatimah, what comes up for you with the goddesses of traditions being hidden away?
I feel like what's coming up for me is really, something about plain sight. That that the divine feminine is hidden within plain sight, and if I think about our tradition, every single surah in the Quran, I think apart from one, starts with Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, in the name of Allah, the infinitely compassionate and the infinitely merciful, which, as the three of us know, Rahman and Ar-Rahim, the root for those words is the root letters for those words is the same as the root letters for the word the womb. And so this is a womb-like mercy and compassion, and this is probably one of the most often recited phrases by all Muslims, men and women, because we are taught from an early age to recite these before every single thing that we do. And yet we are not raised to be aware of that womb-like compassion and mercy. So it's there, but the awareness of it, somehow something's been switched off. And so I feel like it's kind of hidden in plain sight. It's just so evident. It's like the fish that's swimming in the water and saying, where's the water? And I think that is how the divine feminine is that we are immersed in her beauty and we are swimming in it, and we just can't see it because we're so programmed to not see it. We're so used to this patriarchal structure, which is so much about the dominance of man and the masculine, and a particular at present, a particularly toxic masculine, that we just can't see it. We're blinded and we can't see it. And Jill also sort of speaks about the prophetesses, the stories that she heard as a child. And I had heard many times the story of when the prophet, peace be upon him, received the first revelation. I had heard that story many times, and I had heard about how he didn't quite sort of believe that he was receiving revelation, and he ran to his wife. And it wasn't until I read that story and heard it told by my teacher Camille, in her voice, in the way that she spoke of it, and seeing it through her eyes of the prophet coming down from this mountain, really unsure of himself, really unsure of what had happened, really frightened, going to the feminine in his life and saying, cover me up, protect me. And, you know, and she, you know, holding him close and telling him, you know, recognizing his prophethood. And, you know, and that story has been there, and I have heard it many times. And again, in plain sight, and not making this connection of how important women are in our tradition, and how women have a capacity to see things and to recognize things. And, you know, also in the Christian tradition, because this really, I think the starting points of both of these traditions is really about the feminine recognizing what's happening. Because, you know, when Jesus is resurrected, if this is stories in the Bible, when Jesus is resurrected, he is first witnessed by women and by Mary Magdalene. And so we see at the inception of these two great traditions, which very much, you know, we live in the West, and so very much, you know, are inheritors of both the Judeo-Christian tradition as well as the Islam, which we've been born into. So, you know, in these key sort of traditions, women are very present, and we've heard these stories, and yet somehow still it's hidden. And it's almost as if, you know, that there's a moment in our lives individually when that revelation begins to occur, and we can begin to connect with that reality, that deeper sacred feminine aspect of all of reality. And then there's also a point now, it seems, in the world and in the unfolding of our human story, that we are being invited to discover that. And I think it was Karen Georgia that said at the end of her segment that this is, you know, this is really needed right now, for us to see what is in plain sight.
Saimma, what do you think about the goddesses being hidden?
Well, you know, I was going to say that I think they're tired of being hidden, but I think coming back to the moon analogy that you spoke about, Tazeen, they've always been there. But I think that the world is so out of balance that it's inevitable that this shift is going to happen. And of course, there's going to be, you know, there will be resistance to it, as there is to all change. But change can't happen without some form of resistance. Otherwise, it would be easy and we wouldn't notice it. It would just happen and pass by us, and we'd still be, oh, this is nice. This is, did it used to be like this? Maybe it did. Oh, well, and carry on making the same mistakes. And I think there's something interesting about Hinduism in particular. It's not something that I've looked into a lot. I would like to. And I think one of our mutual friends, Naseem Kaku, has helped introduce me to some of these concepts, which is, you know, the Hindu goddesses and gods, I connect them to the attributes of Allah in Islam, right? The different manifestations of the ultimate reality. And there's no such concept of the feminine is soft and nurturing and the mother, and the man, you know, the masculine is conquering and hero and warrior. In Hinduism, it doesn't matter whether the divine is expressed in a masculine or a feminine, you know, face. The attributes intermingle, and I love that. I love that so much. And so, you know, you have the goddesses of destruction and rejuvenation, which is so needed, because the soil that hasn't, you know, been kind of stripped away, it can't bring, you know, new life and, you know, from beneath it. And yeah, I think, again, she's there. She's always been there. And whether she's been hidden or is, you know, like in idols from the Hindu tradition, it's where we choose to, you know, rest our gaze. You know, if we rest it for a moment and we're uncomfortable, we're going to look away. But if we're aware of that uncomfortableness, we may be able to bring it back just for a moment to see what it's bringing up in ourselves. And I think, you know, for us, alhamdulillah, we're so blessed that we have been given the tools to really notice what makes us uncomfortable and to really be able to sit in that and to have each other, to be mirrors for each other. And, you know, Tazeen, you talk about how, you know, I've been banging on about the feminine. I don't think I've been banging on about it, but what I've noticed is I'll be talking about it and people that I perhaps would not have expected to respond, have a response. And so these circles get wider and wider because the mirrors start reflecting more and more. And really it's the uncomfortableness, right, that we really bond over. It's the trauma, the darkness, the not understanding, that then together we can come and the light becomes brighter.
Yeah, that's so beautiful because, I mean, yeah, I shared earlier, I noticed that huge resistance when you first said, oh, come to this Divine Feminine retreat. And it was just pure arrogance and pure not knowing, but just feeling this Divine Feminine, what's she banging on about, going off in my brain, and just thinking, well, I don't need, you know, and then slowly it was like, it stayed with me. It stayed with me, sort of what you had shared, just a little bit that you'd shared. Like, I remember we were walking in the streets of Konya, I think, on one of the Turkey retreats with our teachers, and it just kept coming back. And yeah, exactly what you've shared, Saimma. It's in these places of resistance that we need to look the most. And then also kind of, I want to share next the lady Imam, Dr. Arman al-Wadood, because, you know, we're all three of us Muslims. We've all grown up in a patriarchal, male-dominated, controlled Islam. And I guess it's kind of now the awareness begins to unfold what we do with it, where we go with it, and what is our responsibility for ourselves and for the next generation of women coming into Islam. And so I'd love to share her clip that she shared at RayFest, and to kind of really hold the question as we listen to it on what is being called of each of us, and what is our responsibility, and how we go about claiming the voice, but, you know, as you've shared earlier, in a more balanced way, integrating the masculine and the feminine and not having to do a knee-jerk reaction that it's got to be either or. So here we have the lady Imam, Dr. Arman al-Wadood.
Excuse me. So I want to tell a little story, how I came to own the title, the Lady Imam. As a Black woman, I have been called by many names or titles. Some titles feel comfortable and others do not fit. I'm no longer shy to say when they do not fit. People who do not know me get offended by this assertion. I've had people just stop all communication with me when I make a point about my title preference, or even to insist that I spell my name without capital letters. My mother had only an 8th grade education, and when my father died in his 40s, she had to use her domestic skills in order to find employment. My father had insisted that she only fulfill the roles of housekeeper, mother, and wife. When she went to work and became mistress of her own fate, she still, as a Black woman and a domestic servant, had to be addressed by people who undermined the respect she was due, if only by age. I was raised to never call a woman about the age of my mother, that is someone who is about that age, by her first name, especially Black women. We add Ms. in front of their first name, Miss Nancy or Miss Susan. When I became Muslim, I learned that this was almost a universal habit, with the expectation that women are sisters to each other. So those who are younger use the word auntie, or they use the word uncle. It's quite common. And they also use it in different languages, not just in English. As a professor, a doctor, a PhD, etc., I noticed that in professional settings, men are often acknowledged with their titles and women are not. By the way, I'm invited to a conference that's going to be held in the next couple of weeks, and I'm the only person whose name is there without title. The others have multiple titles, doctor and professor, and some have PhDs afterwards. At this point, I feel like it's a useless point to point it out to them, but in the final program, if this persists, I intend to address it when I am present. This seems like they are being more on friendly terms with women, but really, it's just another way of undermining our achievements. So as a Muslim woman in the public space, I lay claim to my self-naming. I do not spell my name with capital letters, although for most of the years since I chose my name, I allowed others to write my name as they saw fit or according to other rules. Then I started insisting on the spelling of my choice. Lastly, I want to say something about titles you use for Muslim women who function in roles of leadership. I prefer not to be addressed by the feminine version of male names. It's very common for women to be called sheikha. And the word sheikh literally is the word that means an old man, but figuratively, it is imbued with honorific ideas like wise, elder, or leader. But the word in Arabic for old woman is ajuz, and it carries the meaning of frailty, deficiency, and weakness. How is it that one gets old and gets better and the other gets old and gets worse, except that naming is important? Thus, I call myself the Lady Imam, which is an anglicized version and a female affirmed way of doing it. Instead of saying imama, which is the feminized Arabic, I say the Lady Imam. In fact, it cannot be translated into Arabic, and I'm not an Arab. I am a lady who has accepted to act in the role of Imam, the prayer leader, which is not specified to gender until I attach lady in front of it. So that is my naming.
Again, so powerful, and brings this subtlety of it all to light.
I really like how you keep mentioning subtlety, because I think subtlety is a really underrated quality, and we don't realize the power of subtlety. And I want to say something here about Dr. Amina Wadood. I was really lucky to spend some time with her when we were still holding the idea of Ray. And, you know, should it be a separate organization? What would it be? What would it look like? What would the vision be? And I met up with her in London, and I shared to her the journey of the Sacred Feminine retreats and how, there's a real momentum that was growing around it, and that, Fatimah and I were holding this idea of where do we take it, or how do we surrender to what is being asked of us? And she said something that we constantly remind ourselves about. And she said, you must articulate how you want the feminine to be in your vision. She said, if you don't articulate it, you will keep falling back into the hegemonic worldview, which is patriarchal and masculine. And that healthy masculine and toxic masculine, but that is the worldview. That's the default. And it really stayed with us. And, we went through so many different versions of, the vision and how we wanted it to be, but we kept coming back to that. And so, we put in our vision that the energetic state of the feminine is our guiding principle and holds our intention. And we always state that in all of our calls. And this defaulting back to the norm, we keep noticing it when we're doing things, even with the wording, when we thought, okay, we're going to do this gathering. We called it a conference for a really long time before we really looked at what does this word mean? What does it evoke? And to me, a conference is an academic presentation, usually by men, intellectual, and not coming from the heart. And so even coming back to, we spent a while thinking we don't want to call it this. And festival was the word that captured what we were trying to do. And festival has this idea of joy, right? And unpredictability, spontaneity. Celebration, right? And that is the feminine. And we're constantly remembering, I call her Auntie Amna. I'm constantly remembering what Auntie Amna's advice was, because I'm always catching myself, and even with the moon meditation, Tazeen, it was, it's great to have you join us for that. But literally half an hour before we started that call, I was getting ready. I'd, prepared my prayers for the opening meditation, and it was going to be the light prayer from Prophet Muhammad and the light prayer of Saint Patrick.
Yeah.
Saint Patrick's breastplate that Camille had shared over RayFest. And in that half an hour before we were about to go live, I was just listening to some music by Hildegard of Bingen. And all of a sudden, it just came to me. Why are the two prayers that I'm going to use in my opening by men? Nothing wrong with that. But why had I just defaulted to the light prayer that I read every day, right? And then a Christian version of that. And it was like I could hear this voice in the room. And I'm getting ready, we're about to start. And I said to Daniel, like, I've just had this feeling has just come to me. What do you think? And he said, I absolutely agree with it. Why don't you have prayers from women? And he went onto the bookshelf and he picked up Doorkeeper of the Heart, collection of Rabia of Basra's sayings, translated by Charles Upton. And he picked up the Book of Nature, edited by Camille Helwinski. And the next thing you knew, I had this beautiful prayer from Rabia and a beautiful prayer from Hildegard. And that's what I shared in my opening meditation. I still had a few lines of the light verse because that's really special to me, and it's so much about the moon and the reflection and the prophet being the moon-faced one. But it was so important to balance that with what we're trying to do with Ray, which is share feminine spiritual wisdom. And again, that nudge came just at the last moment. And I was lucky that, I have a partner who knows which book to pick to find these pearls. And it just comes across in such subtle, incredibly powerful ways.
Just share again, Saimma, what you shared about what your kind of mission, if you like, was, that one-liner.
Well, it's to share feminine spiritual wisdom, and to realize God in all ways, and to align with justice, truth, and beauty. And to do that, we say that the energetic state of the feminine is our guiding principle, and it holds our intention. So in order to align with justice, truth, and beauty, and to realize God in all ways, you can do that in a variety of ways. But for us, it's always tapping into what is the feminine energy. How would the feminine energy realize God? How would it seek justice, truth, and beauty in the world? And we have so many examples, in our tradition, growing up in a patriarchal Islam. All of the voices that we've heard, have been mostly from men. But like Fatimah said, the women have always been there too. And it's together, the men and women standing side by side, that the wisdom gets passed on.
It's funny what you're sharing, something over the last few months that's really come to light, which is a lot of these things. It's like where it, you know, Rumi talks about borrowed clothes. And I would just say it's actually like waking up one day and realizing that there's a layer of skin that you thought was yours, because skin is just more, that layer more intimate than clothing. But it's like this layer of skin, and you actually believe that that skin was you, only to find it was never of you. And it's just like this outer layer that, you know, a bit like, I guess, if you've got like an overburnt suntan, that it just can peel away. Fathi, what comes up for you on specifically Islam and patriarchy and that subtlety of the name, which Dr. Amina Wadud brings so beautifully to heart?
Yeah, I was, you know, it has made me reflect on, you know, the power of naming. And that it is, you know, something that's been very much in the hands of men. But really, you know, and I know that's not just in our own tradition, and it's not just in religious traditions too, actually, because, you know, it invariably reminds me of English language lessons as a teenager, and, you know, talking about how master always has a positive connotation and mistress a negative, and how, you know, even in the English language, there's more negative terms for women than there are for men. And so, you know, just, it really just reminded me of that, and just really made me hold this, you know, wanting to hold this more in my awareness of the power of naming. And we often talk about, you know, it's common in academic sort of circles and, you know, feminist academic circles to reflect on this idea of the male gaze of the woman. And I think that, you know, the naming, it feels like it's sort of something similar, that, that, you know, it's taking something away from you in terms of your sovereignty as a person, as a woman, that someone is able to put you in a box like that. And I know it's something that I've always resisted, actually, but I never really thought about it in terms of title, you know, and these religious titles in the way that, you know, Amina, Auntie Amina described in her sharing, actually. But I really feel, yeah, the power of that. And I think that, you know, when I think about other sort of subtle ways, you know, when we were reflecting on this question yesterday as well, one of the things that was coming to me really, and it's something that I've shared with, you know, with Saimma before, and I think probably in other settings, about, you know, how being in Muslim spaces, sometimes I really feel that women, even the most assertive of women, are kind of silenced in really sort of subtle ways, you know, even just by a joking comment by a man can just silence, you know, something that's said, or can diffuse a really important, you know, a really learned, erudite woman would make or somebody who's really active in the community space and really knows the space so well. She makes this wonderful contribution, and a man on a panel, on a majority male panel, can just diffuse and undermine her really important point just by making a joke, and everybody laughs, even the women. And I've seen this happen, you see, and this is why it's really stayed with me. And I think that it's been something really important for us in our work with Ray as well, to, you know, to really try and create a space where nobody feels that they can even do that, you know, and to really, you know, and I'm not saying that that's been all, as I feel the divine has really held us within that, to create that space. And really what we've brought to it is the intention to create sacredness and safety, and that everybody's voice is equal. And within that, hoping that, you know, that permeates outward into the virtual or physical space, and people respect it. And of course, there's a lot of prayer that accompanies that hopeful prayer that, yes, people will show this deep love and respect to each other. But so many sort of Muslim conferences, gatherings, meetings, roundtables, you know, where women are just really very subtly kind of just put back into the box. Yes, what you're saying is really important. And yes, we'd love to see, for example, you know, more equal spaces for women in mosques. And yeah, it's really great that you've been working on that for 20 years, but let's just shut you right down with a laugh and a joke. And it's just, yeah, and it's amazing actually how it's done. And I think that as we go on in this journey, and particularly, I guess, you know, being on a spiritual path where one is, you know, learning to be much more aware of oneself and much more attentive and aware and listening to what is going on around you also, you begin to really pick up these subtleties actually. And so when Amina was speaking, really, I was being reminded of these things that, you know, yes, it is so incredibly subtle, the different ways in which our voices are shut down, we are put into boxes, and yes, we're just sort of saying, like, it's time, we'd like to just come out and just be and just know who we are, and that is it. And that would be great if we could do that without people feeling that they need to name and, you know.
Yeah, I had, after I got married, changed my surname to take on my husband's family surname, but I found myself again when I reclaimed professionally and went back to my maiden name, which even that isn't that authentic, seeing as that was my father's and not, you know, my mother's, and we have to go back. But it is interesting why society and why it gets accepted to take on the male name. And again, it's these different layers of subtlety, just simple things like being in the Kingston Mosque, and the men decided, like the women in the Kingston Mosque have a fraction of space compared to the men, but this is quite normalized across Muslim culture, although it may be changing at the moment. But what was interesting is one time I was there and a man came to take part of the women's section, and not one woman felt it was okay to challenge it. The dear friend that I was with, Shazia, she did actually speak up, and she's like, can you please go back down? We need that space. But it fascinated me how, you know, what you were sharing about how finding that voice and then discerning of how to use it most powerfully in the moment actually requires a hell of a lot. Just to come into that moment. And even, you know, I keep thinking about how do I want it to be for my daughter? Being in Istanbul in one of the big mosques, I can't remember which one it was now, and my daughter, who was 6 at the time, saying, why are we praying at the back? I want to go pray with my dad and brother. And I just said, go. They're over there, go with them and pray with them. And then reflecting, I wish I'd taken the next step, which was actually to go with her and join her. So again, it's so subtle. I don't have the answers. I'm exploring it with you, of what is required from us in any moment. As Dr. Amina Wadud shares, it could just be a very simple, what's in my name, and hold that in the moment. What I do quickly want to touch upon with you both are some of the more challenging sides, actually, of the feminine, because I've been in mosques too, where it's the women that are beating me up for a hair strand showing outside of my veil, or yelling at me for wearing nail polish to a mosque. I even have women close to me who will yell at me about praying, and if I'm not praying, apply certain consequences, but may question why one is praying in the first place. So I want to talk about these darker aspects to the feminine. It's a big subject, I know, but you know, if we just take it back to, let's say, Sarah and Hagar and the envy that sat between those two women, and how sort of patriarchy and that expectation of a man and the provision from a man, and then the security aspects for a woman, then creating fear in the system, if you like, that then gets passed through generations. So I mean, even just through Ray and organising Ray, what parts of the darker side of the feminine show her head? And what do you both have to share about her?
Saimma?
Thank you, Fatimah.
You're welcome.
Yes. So I have to start by saying there is no negativity in the divine masculine or the divine feminine. There's nothing negative in the divine. I think it's really important to be really clear with the definitions. Light and darkness is part of the divine. There is positivity in the darkness. Definitely my journey to the divine has been in the dark. And she is the most important aspect of the divine for me. And strangely enough, I see the dark feminine as the dark divine as feminine and the light divine as masculine. That's just my own personal journey. I think when we come into these aspects of positivity and negativity, or healthy and toxic, we're not looking at divine attributes, we're looking at the ego, right? So we have a healthy ego and we have a toxic ego. And this will come up regardless of what gender you are, however you identify. But so with that kind of proviso, if we're looking at human beings and how we interact and not the divine aspects, then yes, I absolutely, agree that some of the upholders of patriarchy are women, especially for those of us who come from, I'm going to give a very, kind of painting a very broad brush here from my own experience of the Pakistani community. And this is a huge topic, and would love to, hopefully maybe you might be able to get a speaker that can do justice to this. But I recently listened to a series that was offered online called The Shadow Side of the Feminine. And what I found was a lot of the speakers were not talking about the shadow side of the feminine. They were just talking about toxic attributes that human beings can embody. And one of the really excellent speakers on there was, and I'm going to send you the full name because it'd be great if you could share this with speakers, with the listeners here. Dr. Herakuti. He is a sexologist and also, I think, a historical anthropologist. And he said something that for me summed it up so succinctly with how this problem with women upholding the patriarchy. And he talked about how men are in power, usually white men, right, are in power, and the rest of us are down here, especially people of color. And he was talking about it particularly in terms of slavery and how white women would uphold slavery. So you have the white men at the top and everybody else at the bottom, and the white women are in the middle. They're not elevated from the people of color because they're still having to deal with the crumbs that the patriarchy are giving them. And so they're in the middle of getting a crumb and being really glad that they've been given a crumb, right? And wanting to hold on to that crumb at the expense of everybody that's below them. And he talked about it in this very specific example, but I think that goes for any human being. When you've been oppressed and then you've been granted a sliver of light, it's so precious that you will do whatever you can to maintain that sliver of light, whether it's for yourself or for your loved ones or your children or your community or your country. This is where patriotism can come into it as well, and nationalism. It's when you've been given a little and you daren't ask for any more. And so you need to protect that. And during RayFest, one of our speakers, Dr. Jagbir Jyoti Johal, she spoke about within our communities, how this plays out. And I think this is a really important question, and it's something that we would like to explore with Ray, to be able to look at how do we keep upholding these systems that do not work for us, but it's all we know. We haven't been exposed to something else. And until that happens, until we have enough people that can do the work and, are brave enough to speak out, like, your friend in the mosque, it takes somebody speaking out for someone else to think, oh, could I do that? Is that possible? Is that allowed? And it's a slow process. But this is what's happening. I do feel like, we're seeing this in so many different aspects of the world right now. Me Too movement being one of them, where one person speaks out and empowers another. And it takes such courage because this is all rooted in trauma,
yes.
Right? So if you're willing to speak out, then you have to be brave enough to share a little bit of yourself. When for generations, we've just been covering ourselves. We've been trying to protect ourselves. And that's where taking that little crumb becomes so important, because that's all we have, and we don't have anything to compare it against.
Fatimah.
Yeah, what I would add is really that, that to be working, I guess as we all are on discovering our own shadow, the parts of ourselves that we have suppressed, and our own woundedness. Being on a spiritual path it brings all of that to the surface, and we're invited to shed light upon it, to come to know it. And sometimes what's in the shadow can actually be something very healthy and very beautiful that needs to come out and not be suppressed anymore. And sometimes it's so it's not always something negative that's in the shadow. It can be something really quite positive. But of course, to bring it into integration makes us healthier. And I feel that, that there's, the part of us that's, looking for that crumb or whatever it might be, or that is in the state of mind of scarcity or insecurity, can be healed as we come to a deeper integration by bringing light to these aspects of ourselves. And so this healing of ourselves can really be the thing, our contribution to sort of ensuring that, how we then engage in the world is not putting pressure on anybody else, and that we're not buying into, Pat McCabe often talks about Woman Stands Shining, wonderful woman from the Navajo Dene tradition, but also initiated into the Lakota tradition, really incredible woman. She often speaks about how we are in a power over paradigm. So, and whilst we are in this power over paradigm, where it's all about what kind of power can we have over somebody else, and that's what the patriarchy is about. It's about that, rather than working with others. That that as long as we are in that space, we will feel the scarcity will continue to add to that kind of dynamic and paradigm. So that healing process that we can do can bring us out of that way of thinking, that pattern. And I think the other thing that I would really say is that as women, one of the things that's really come to me so powerfully over this whole period of the festival is just how important it is to stick at working together as women. you know, because it's so easy to, you know, to between ourselves to decide, oh, well, I don't agree with your understanding of the feminine, you know, or I don't buy that, or this, I've got a better idea, you know, but, you know, and it's the ego in that insecurity mode, and, you know, oh, I'm losing my specialness. What is this, you know? And you're in that scarcity mode, and the greatest antidote to it is to say, yes, okay, I see you, and I see where that's coming from, but just keep at this working together thing, because you will create something beautiful, and you've done it before, and it will happen again. And it's not, you know, it's not that you did it by yourself. It is that it happened. It was as beautiful as it was because you stuck at working together. And I feel that, you know, as women that are seeking to be conscious, you know, it really falls upon us now to never really give up on those opportunities and possibilities of coming together, of working together, regardless of, you know, where whatever thing our ego is going through. Of course, we don't ignore that. We acknowledge it. We see where it is. We bring it to the light. But we always turn back sort of to each other and say, okay, what are we doing next? Okay, you know, let's keep going. Because I just feel that the time that we live in is also about that. It is about the collaborative spirit. And, you know, and when we fall out of this, we're just falling back into that kind of darker, or not toxic feminine, should I say, of, you know, that self-preservationist kind of unconscious feminine that is pulling in the different directions. I feel like the antidote is just this, is to keep moving towards one another, and to not give up on those places and spaces where we can be in a unity and work towards that wholeness and model a really healthy, wholesome feminine, you know.
And I'm guessing it's also kind of linked to just the very nature of spirit, souls coming in, you know, being embodied, and the ultimate fear being in our own non-existence. I remember listening to Elizabeth Ann Hinn. I know she's a dear friend of teachers Kabir and Camille, a mystic in her own right from the White Rose Foundation, who one of her podcasts was talking about women buying designer handbags. And it's all just based on, oh, well, if I have this one, I'm somehow better than you. And it's this, again, these subtle ways in everyday existence, in our own discernments of what our intention with any of it is. I mean, one could objectively say one's buying a handbag just for the beauty and the craftsmanship of the bag, and fine. But it's being really honest inside.
But if we were coming from a place of safety and security, we wouldn't be envying each other's handbags. And I think that's the key, right? Is that we're not, as a collective, we're not safe and secure.
The Divine Feminine cards, Fathi, that you introduced me to, the one for 2021 for this one is Lakshmi, the goddess of abundance. And I love what she says, you know, abundance is finding the wealth inside of you. And it just makes me reflect on Jesus, on so many, you know, our prophet, peace be upon him, and so many of those saints and guides that have come before us that have lived in absolute poverty and yet led the lives of kings. And it's you know, when we find the treasure within, what from dunya would satisfy anything that needs satisfaction. We've talked about healing. I would love to share the healing of sound that came very strongly through RayFest. I've got Kohanet Rachel Rose Reed, and I think we'll just let her do the speaking.
what would it be in the Shir HaShirim, in the Song of Songs, if we imagined that the female character were the beloved, were God? Then she says, find me, look for me, kiss me with the kisses of your mouth. What sweet things for the divine to say. So this, which I will put some words in the chat. The first lines there are Hebrew, Kol dodi hine zeba. Hear the voice of my beloved, capitalize if you wish. Hear her voice, she comes through me. And Arabic added also with the same intent by my sister community, Makam Shahina, based in California, who also, like myself and Fahad, sometimes join together singing and learning both Sufi and Hebrew chants together, and seeing what unity we can find when we come together. There might be a dance to Kol Dodi, but there are also many tunes. If you want to make a dance and you're feeling shy, you are most welcome to get up and step to the side of your camera. If you are not feeling shy, you can dance wherever you like. So join in with whichever words as you wish. First line goes, Kol Dodi hine zebaba. Kol Dodi hine zebaba. Kol Dodi hine zeba. Kol Dodi hine zebaba. Kol Dodi hine zeba. You'll find this goes very well as a round if you're feeling particularly musical. Hear the voice of my beloved. Hear her voice, she comes through me. Hear the voice of my beloved. Hear her voice, she comes through me. Kol Dodi hine zebaba. Kol Dodi hine zeba.
What did other participants of Ray feed back? I mean, I personally found the music to it so incredibly beautifully healing.
Yeah, she's amazing. We were so grateful that she could be part of the festival. Fatimah and I actually met her, gosh, was it 2019, I think. We went to a gathering, it was called Sacred Feminine Rising, and Rachel was one of the co-facilitators. And we were both just so struck by how she held the space, and of course her amazing Hebrew chants. And we immediately had thought, you know, like we have to have her for the festival whenever we decided to have the festival. And so when you know it occurred, we were just absolutely thrilled that she was able to join. And she has this, as you know, you can see this amazing ability to weave the tradition, but also connect to whoever's listening, you know, to make it seem very accessible. And yeah, we had amazing feedback from all the friends, and this was one of the key themes as well. So the kind of overarching theme of the festival for this for last year was her space, and as part of her space, it naturally incorporates her voice. And so a lot of the contributors spoke about this, and a lot of the feedback we got from friends was how affirming it was to hear women who were unafraid, you know, unapologetically using their voice through such different ways in their various fields, and how empowering that was for the participants. And also at the same time, how challenging that was. So we had feedback from participants that said a lot of the things that came up about the voice was very uncomfortable, because again, they were looking to themselves and seeing, how do they use their voice? Why don't they use their voice? How is their voice diminished or controlled in different settings? And so such a wide variety of feedback that came back, but ultimately, sparking that conversation and looking within for each of the participants to see, where is my voice, and what, can I join in? Am I joining in with these chants? What's inhibiting me from joining in, whether my camera is on or off? For some people, I think it's a challenge even to listen to your own voice, even in the safety of your own space in your own room. I think that's quite a painful realization to have, that it's not coming from the outside sometimes, those aspects that are stopping us from sharing ourselves. It's sometimes self-imposed, and that can be very difficult to witness. But yeah, wonderful. All of our contributors gave us this opportunity to hear the voice in so many different traditions, so many different nuanced ways, the powerful subtlety again coming through. Yeah.
Finally, if I could, sorry, Fathi, did you have anything to add there? I want to talk about the Jewish mother who birthed Christianity, who's so revered in the Quran. I mean, the chapter is dedicated to Mary through Surah Maryam. There isn't a chapter dedicated specifically in name to Jesus, I might add. What does she speak, or how is she speaking to both of your hearts today?
Yeah, Mary is very important in my journey, and I feel again, like she's always been there, but perhaps in recent years her presence and her calling is more powerful. And perhaps as this work with the sacred feminine has unfolded, she has felt more present. And a few years ago, we were in Turkey with our teachers, and there was a chance to visit Ephesus and visit, her chapel there, where some believe, she spent her final days. And it's always really, really awe-inspiring just to think, that so many people from so many different traditions are calling for Mary, or invoking her, or feeling her presence, or wanting that closeness with her. And this little tiny chapel in Ephesus, which has been warmed by so many prayers and so many hearts wishing to connect with her presence. And it was a really special experience, and I was there with other friends from our Sufi community, but really particularly a lot of women, and there were a lot of women on that trip, and it was very poignant. A lot of women holding different things in their heart at that time, and yeah, I think that had sort of strengthened that kind of connection, and gave it new energy too. And when I came back home, it's strange, I've lived in, as you both know, I've recently moved, but before this, I've lived in almost, the same place for most of my adult life. And, and I didn't know for years and years that there was at the local sort of Roman Catholic church, which is a really short walk from my old home, there is an outdoor chapel to Mary. And it's very actually very visible. This whole thing about being hidden in plain sight, you know. I would have driven past it and walked past it so many times before I actually saw it. And it was really, it was after that visit to Ephesus that I discovered this chapel so close. And my practice in last sort of couple of years particularly has really included being that outdoor chapel and being in prayer and invoking that presence of Mary, and just really the human aspect of Mary, just the difficulty of her journey, the trust that she showed in the divine, her prophetesshood really as well, like this strength of hers. I know in the Islamic tradition she is, in the mainstream Islamic tradition, she's not recognized as a prophet. And it feels like it is just on like some technical point, because, in the Quran, the way that she is described as receiving Jesus is very similar. In fact, it's the same wording that's used for how the prophet received revelation. And but for my heart, regardless of this, she's a prophetess. She was carrying and bringing forth a really powerful message for humanity through her being and through the birth of Jesus. And I feel there's just so many aspects to her being that are continually being unveiled, and there's a real sweetness. I'm so grateful for her companionship. I think, in the Islamic tradition, one is taught from an early age to really revere the Prophet, peace be upon him, and to really have him as a companion. And it's been really wonderful over the course of this journey with our teachers, but the journey with the Divine Feminine, to have spiritual women of years past as companions, to call on them in prayer, to have them with you in your circle of remembrance, to read their words or the words attributed to them, to read sometimes their poetry. So I'm just so much more conscious than ever before of these really powerful women of spirit, our spiritual ancestors that we can be with. And so to be with Mary has such a sweetness. And again, I feel that, this awareness of Mary, and just this awareness that so many people, Muslims, Christians, but also outside of these traditions, they just feel so drawn to her, so connected to her, and that this is growing. And various Facebook groups and social media accounts that follow Mary, that are about Mary, that are invoking her in some way, and you really see that she means so much to so many people, so integral to their journeys. And so I guess I'm just one of those many people to whom she is really important.
I've always loved the saying in our tradition, may the Mary of your body birth the Jesus of your spirit. And, just holding that trust and patience, which are the energies that I associate to Mary, or the qualities, so that we can keep that flame of the divine alive. Saimma, do you have anything to share about your holding of Mary?
Questions about Mary. I have questions about how she was allowed into a temple where only men were allowed. There's no details about what was recognized in her as a child that she was brought into the inner sanctuary. what strength she had to accept the divine seed that manifested as a word, what strength she had to come back to the village and deal with the glances, and what strength she had to know that she was bringing a prophet into the world, and what that means, right? There's history of all the prophets that came before and how they were received, not with welcome arms. And then again, the strength that she bore to see what her son went through. I think there's so much more to Mary than we have been exposed to. She is not this mild, meek, willing handmaiden of God. That's what I feel. And I'm really excited to be on this journey to see where these questions take us.
Well, thank you both very, very much. It's been a really amazing chat. The only last question that I have that I'm just going to throw in, what do men make of Ray?
We have lots of men in Ray. We're very blessed. We are really lucky with our community, that we're all part of, that we're supported by. And I think, at the end of RayFest, we had a few of the friends share, and, Ghassan, one of our friends, is also a trustee of Ray. He shared that he probably wouldn't have been interested in this if it wasn't for the fact that he knew Fatimah and I. And it just made me realize how blessed we are to know men of spirit who are open to exploring these questions with us, and they don't see it as something that they're watching. They're actively participating in it. And I wouldn't have it any other way, because this is not just, Ray is women-centered and women-led, but this is a journey for all of us. And we're not trying to recruit more men. We just trust that those who are interested will find a resonance and they'll want to join. And we've witnessed, there was a wonderful community for RayFest, and continuing with our moon meditations. So, yeah.
Thank you both so much. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having us, Tazeen.
Thank you, Tazeen.
Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining me on Tazeen TV. Now, as a transformational life coach, I help and support those who might be feeling stuck, or who just want to connect deeper to their sense of self and purpose. So maybe have a look at some of our offerings, and why not join me on one of our free workshops to begin that journey of aligning and optimizing your life. Now, for those wishing to better their telepresence, you can find out more about our media training offerings. Again, have a look at the website, and I look forward to continuing journeying with you soon.